My name is Kwando M. Kinshasa, born and raised in New York, specifically in Harlem, then moved up to the Bronx. I went to junior high school and high school in the Bronx, and as a result of that, decided that I was going to go off into college, but I wasn't quite ready for that, and I got myself a regular job that a high school student would get doing some sort of clerical work, in Lower Manhattan. However, by the time I got to 1959, I decided that, I need to see the rest of the world, and I wanted to see what was going on. Besides the civil rights movement that was again picking up. So I went and I joined, of all organizations, I joined the Marines. And that probably was the most important track to go on for me at that time, because it allowed me to, in fact, not only go down to South Carolina, to do basic training, but I also met a whole host of new folks from the South, a lot of Bloods, and Latinos, and white guys also. In the 10 years that I'm going to spend in the Marine Corps, a good portion, a good half of that 10 years is going to be spent in Central America, where I'm coming in contact with a variety of ethnic groups and people and so on. And it was there where I began to realize that I need to know more about the world, but not knowing how to do that, except within inside of the military construct. I was trying to decide what to do. So when I finished my first 9 years, and I had 45 days to then decide whether I was going to sign up to make the Marines a career, I came back up to New York. That was in the midst of the civil rights movement also occurring, not only in New York, but throughout the entire South. In fact, to show you how naive I was, before I went to New York, I passed through Jacksonville, Florida at the very same time that, that they were having sit-ins in the restaurants and so on, and I was like shocked at what the hell is going to happen there. So I get up to New York, and to see how I thought things have changed, but they hadn't changed. They in fact enhanced more because of the antagonism and the civil rights orientation going on. What has changed was my vision and my sense of reality and my sense of who I was then. And I decided, no, I was not going to sign up for the Marines. That would be it, but I'll use my GI Bill. And I didn't use my GI Bill till actually about another year and a half later, just checking out different political groups and so forth. And I decided that, okay, I want a PhD and I want to be able to travel the world and do some research and to understand what's occurring and why things are occurring. And of course, at the same time, civil rights leaders were being killed. There was political movements in the Caribbean, there with Cuba and so forth. Africa, was changing and so forth in many different ways. And I had a conversation with a cousin of mine who's much older than me, who actually met and knew Nkrumah, Kwame Nkrumah, when he was a student back in the 1920s. And the word came down to my family that he, as Nkrumah, fell in love with my cousin, who was much older than me, but her father told her that he didn't want her to, in fact, have anything to do with this crazy African who was at University of Pennsylvania. Well, this crazy African turned out to be Kwame Nkrumah, okay? But to go fast forward on this one topic, years later, when I met my wife, for over 50 some odd years later, when we went down, I wanted her to meet my cousin, and we had brought our children down, and we had this nice little conversation about her life, and the Africans that she met in the 30s and so forth. And we saw this trunk there, old seaman's trunk, and he opened up the trunk, and I was getting ready to open up the trunk, and my cousin Juanita said, no, leave the trunk alone. No. I said, well, what's in there? I said, that's some of Nkrumah's stuff in there. I said, well, I'm going to see this. I said, no, don't even touch it, and so on. Right. So there was an envelope on top of the trunk itself. I said, well, can I at least open up the envelope and see what's inside it? And it was a yellow paper that now turned basically white line paper. And on the very top of the line, it says, my thoughts and conditions of West Africa. I feel that. And then he signed it. and nothing else was on the piece of paper. So I looked at it. I looked at my cousin and said, "This is a piece of paper. You mind if I have that?" She said, "You can take anything you want, but just don't go and touch any of those pamphlets, books inside." I took that. We now have that encased in the library, and we're going to actually donate it to Schomburg, because it was even dated. He said, "I feel that, and for whatever reason, he didn't finish that." Okay, so that actually was a very strong pivoting moment for me in terms of my need to, in fact, develop a steady regimen of photographing and interviewing as many people as I could that was important in terms of African experience. And fortunately, my wife was the same sentiment and so forth. And as a consequence, the next 15, 20 years, we've been able to travel the African continent twice, interviewed a lot of individuals who were involved in the decolonization of some of the areas of Africa, even those Africans who had left Africa itself and were living in Europe, like in Holland and in Germany. We, in fact, were able to visit them. I got grants because I was working now. Now I'm teaching at City University, New York, so I was writing grants to study the lifestyle of Africans who were living, educated in Europe. Right? And so that's become a very strong point of interest for me. Some of the material has been donated to Schomburg Library in Harlem. So my track has basically been, interest has been looking at the African diaspora and to see how the changes are occurring right now. Okay, I took some students to Ghana maybe about 20 years ago, and it was the first time, obviously, that they have been to a West African country, and they enjoyed it and so forth. But it was a very telling trip, because the day before we were getting ready to leave, we went back up to the university in Accra to get some old books that they were willing to give some of my students to take back and to read about Ghana itself. But when we went back to the library at the university, there was this long line of apparently Asian students outside. And my students wanted to know, well, who are those folks who are there? I said, they could be Asian, and maybe Chinese, Japanese, Korean, I don't know. But I would go and check. So I went inside, and I was talking to the director inside there. He said, well, you need to go, Professor, you need to go back outside and explain to your students, your African-American students, that these are the children of Chinese businessmen, right? And they are preparing their kids to repossess the land and their investments and so on and so on. I said, okay. I went back outside, and I left one most important point, and I asked him, how I hear them communicating to you in Yoruba. He said, yeah, they're fluent in Yoruba. I said, okay. So I went outside and told my kid, particularly one individual I still remember right now, who he had the opportunity to learn a few words in Yoruba in terms of food, hello, and so on. And he was refusing to do it. He was kind of a wise-ass individual. And I said, well, let me tell you guys one thing. Those are the children of businessmen who are going to not even replace you, because you're not going to be anything here in terms of Ghana and so forth. Then they got upset with me because blah, 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 blah. But it was a learning thing for them. Yeah. So that experience also, in terms of myself and my wife, as a catalyst, I met a lot of folks of African or indigenous and African in South America, and particularly in Venezuela, also in Guyana, and I began to interview them in terms of how they related to Europe. I met some folks who actually were able to introduce me to some Black Dutch folks who were involved in World War II, fighting against the Nazis. I interviewed them. I interviewed the premier of Guyana, the president of Haiti, the leadership of Cuba. All this in grants I've been able to write, and I donated most of the tapes and so to the Schomburg Library in New York. So my orientation was basically, it was to look at the diaspora and to better understand that in terms of an African American who was, while we'd like to refer to us as African, the reality is our cultural orientation is here. Yeah? That's not to say that we don't have connections there and could not very easily absorb back into the continent. So we've been traveling, we've traveled the entire periphery of the African continent from Mozambique to straight on down on the east side and down on the west side. A good buddy of mine who was a MD in South Africa, not in South Africa, in Kenya. He invited us to come in, and we spent 2 or 3 weeks with him and so forth. So that's been our orientation. Yeah, and of course I would look at things from a social, historical perspective. My wife, as being a nurse, she tends to look at things from a medical health perspective and so forth. So it's been a fantastic synergy between the two of us. And so all that means comes down to this: is that I have a lot of tapes, audio tapes of folks that been thinking about very hard and contact libraries such as Schomburg. And in fact, all of the books I've written, about 7 books I've written, I've used some of that material. For example, I came across the listing. Well, let me back up. There was a couple who we met who were Dutch Americans, who were very, very politically oriented, very culturally and socially advanced. Asked me if I wanted to speak to one of the leaders of the Dutch underground during World War II, who was still alive. He was 99 years old at the time. I said, damn right, I want to do that. So they introduced me to him. Maya and I traveled back over to Holland to sit down and interview this man. What came out of that was a series of articles that were in journals right now. But he was a brother who was about, he was tall if he was 5 feet. When the Nazis came into Holland, they just ignored him because he was, look at that, shrimp, black. What a threat is it? This guy was one of the main leaders of the underground movement against the Nazis, right? And he said, well, I'm 99 years old. I don't know how long I'm going to live. Yeah, and you're the first Negro American I met, and so forth and so on, so I'll talk to you. And we sat there for about 3 hours and taped him. Then I met Anton de Combs. That was his name. Anton de Combs was the main character. Then I met de Combs was his sister, and I taped a little bit of her. But what happened with that is going to emerge as a series of tapes that captures Holland about 1938, 39, and then into the 40s from their perspective, And so it's been valuable material. To make a long story short, I've been doing a lot of taping all over, and taped the president of, I always forget the president of Suriname, the brother that was assassinated. I taped him. I taped the former president of Haiti. Done some taping in Cuba, and all this stuff, all this material. We're trying to make sure that Schomburg gets it. I know that Schomburg has a plethora of material that they can't even, hold on to. So they basically, but I'm trying to make sure that the material doesn't become lost. Though I'm graduated from NYU with a PhD, and they are very sympathetic to getting hold of that material. Why pay for it if they could wait till the individual dies and then it'll be bequeathed to them by the family? I mean, I hate to be that cynical, but